Nobody saw Marcus Webb cry. Not when the hospital called at 3 a.m. to say Denise's lungs had filled again. Not when the bank sent the third foreclosure warning in an envelope too thin to hold that much ruin. Not when his daughter Naya, 9 years old and already fluent in silence, stopped asking why Mommy's side of the bed was always cold. Marcus cried exactly once, in the parking garage of Sterling Meridian Hotel, Washington, D.C., sitting in a 12-year-old Civic with a cracked windshield and a tool belt across his lap, the night before he started the only job that had called him back. He cried for 40 seconds. Then he wiped his face with the heel of his hand, clipped his name badge to a gray maintenance shirt, and walked into the service entrance like a man who had already buried the version of himself that the world once respected. That was 14 months ago. Tonight, he stood behind a velvet curtain on the west side of the grand ballroom, replacing a junction box that had been buzzing since Thursday. His hands moved with the automatic memory of a man who once designed emergency infrastructure for city hospitals. Hands that had signed contracts worth more than this hotel's annual revenue. Hands that now smelled of copper dust and industrial soap. In the chest pocket of his shirt, folded twice and soft from handling, was a crayon drawing Naya had slipped into his lunch bag that morning. A stick figure in a gray shirt holding a wrench, standing next to a smaller figure in a yellow dress. Beneath them, in wobbly purple letters, "My dad fixes everything." He touched the edge of the drawing without taking it out. A habit. The way other men check their watches or adjust their ties, Marcus touched that piece of paper and remembered why he was here. Through the curtain, the Sterling Meridian Gala hummed with 400 voices, 300 champagne flutes, and the particular sound wealth makes when it gathers in a room designed to flatter it. Crystal chandeliers cast soft gold across black tie donors, tech investors, and society photographers whose cameras moved like trained animals, always pointing toward money. At the center of it all stood Vivienne Calloway. She was 41. CEO of Calloway Bryce Holdings. Her company owned commercial towers in 6 cities and affordable housing developments in 9 more. She wore a black gown that did not try to be noticed, because Vivienne had learned long ago that when you are the only woman at the head of a table surrounded by men who believe the chair was always meant for them, being noticed is not the same as being seen. Men had pursued her since the first magazine called her the most powerful woman in American real estate. Some wanted her name. Some wanted her signature. Some simply wanted the story, "I had dinner with Vivienne Calloway," as if proximity to her power was itself a currency. Grant Prescott wanted all 3, and tonight he had stopped pretending otherwise. Prescott Capital managed $14 billion in assets. Grant himself managed every room he entered with the precision of a man who had been told yes so many times that no had become merely a pause in the conversation. He stood beside Vivienne near the main stage, his left hand wrapped around her wrist. Not her hand, her wrist, with the casual pressure of a man retrieving something he believed already belonged to him. "Vivienne," his voice was low, dressed in a smile. "Don't make this difficult. Everyone here knows you came alone." Again, his thumb shifted across the thin skin above her bracelet. "I'm offering you partnership. Stability. The kind of protection a woman in your position should welcome, not refuse." Vivienne's face did not change, but beneath the composure, something small and tired pressed against her ribs. The exhaustion of being chased by men who dressed their hunger in the language of care. She pulled her wrist. Gently, clearly, Grant did not let go. "You're being emotional," he said, as if naming the weather. "Sit down. Let's talk about the Wexler acquisition." A few guests nearby glanced over, then looked away with the practiced disinterest of people who had learned that wealth forgives almost anything, and silence forgives the rest. The room saw, and the room chose not to see, because seeing would require doing, and doing would require risking something more expensive than conscience. Behind the curtain, Marcus heard the shift in the room's frequency. Not the words, those were too quiet, but the texture of the silence. He had spent years reading buildings, the hum of overloaded circuits, the tick of expanding pipes, the almost human groan of a foundation settling unevenly. He read rooms the same way, and this room had just gone wrong. He parted the curtain an inch. He saw the hand on her wrist. He saw her pulling. He saw the room pretending. Upstairs, Naya was sitting cross-legged beside her science project, adjusting a tiny lead strip inside a model building made of shoeboxes, drinking straws, and silver duct tape. Her project was called When the Lights Go Out, How Old Buildings Keep People Safe. She had built it after a night when the power failed in her mother's hospital room. A night Naya never fully explained, but never forgot. Her showcase started in 12 minutes. Marcus thought of her. He thought of his job, his invisibility, the only thing that kept a black maintenance worker safe inside a building that loved his labor but not his presence. He thought of Denise. The last thing she had said to him that was not about pain or medication was this: Marcus, don't teach Naya to be brave. Teach her that brave people still get scared. They just don't leave. He set the junction box cover on the floor. He pushed through the curtain. The ballroom noticed him the way a body notices a splinter, not with alarm, but with the low irritation of something that does not belong. A maintenance man. Gray shirt. Dark work pants dusted at the knees, a tool belt hanging at one hip. His name badge read M. Webb in faded block letters. He was tall, broad-shouldered, and moved with the unhurried steadiness of a man who had learned that rushing made you easier to dismiss. He stopped 6 feet from Grant Prescott. She asked you to stop. His voice was low, not loud enough to carry past the nearest tables, but in a room that had chosen silence, even a whisper sounds like a bell. Grant turned slowly, more confused than offended, the way a man looks at a chair that has moved on its own. He studied Marcus from the name badge to the steel-toed boots and seemed to arrive at a conclusion that satisfied him completely. "I'm sorry. Are you speaking to me?" "Yes, sir." "And you are?" The man who heard her say no. A ripple moved through the nearest guests. Someone gave a short, nervous laugh. A photographer lowered her camera, unsure whether this was a moment worth recording or a scene worth forgetting. Grant released Vivienne's wrist, not because Marcus had compelled him, but because holding it while being watched by a maintenance worker felt, to Grant, like a demotion. He straightened his jacket with both hands. "This," Grant said, turning slightly toward the room, "is why events need better staffing policies." He looked back at Marcus. "Whatever you think you saw, you are mistaken. Ms. Calloway and I were having a private conversation." "Private conversations don't need an audience to feel safe," Marcus said. "If this story is already hitting different, take a second to hit that subscribe button and drop a comment telling us where you're watching from." Stories like this one, about quiet dads who never make the news but change the room, they only reach more people when you share them. Now, back to what happened next, because the night was far from over. Grant's smile thinned, but did not disappear. That was the danger of men like Grant. The smile was load-bearing, structural, and removing it would mean admitting that the architecture of his charm had been built on something hollow. "Listen to me carefully," Grant said, lowering his voice to the register men use when they want to sound reasonable while being cruel. "I donate more to this hotel in a single evening than you will earn in a decade. I sit on boards that shape the skyline of this city. I do not explain myself to the man who changes light bulbs." Marcus looked at him steadily. Not with defiance, not with anger, but with the particular stillness of a man who had already lost the things that make threats effective. You cannot frighten a man with poverty when he has already been poor. You cannot threaten his pride when he has already chosen humility on purpose, knowing what it cost. I change light bulbs, Marcus said. You're right about that. But I also know what darkness looks like when someone creates it on purpose. The words reached the tables nearby. A woman in a silver gown set down her fork. The room was not rallying behind Marcus. Rooms like this rarely rally behind the help, but it was listening, and listening in a place built on polite ignorance was already a kind of revolution. Grant turned to Vivienne. Vivienne, tell this man to go back to his closet before he embarrasses himself further. Vivienne looked at Grant, then at Marcus. She studied the maintenance worker the way she studied buildings before acquiring them. Not the facade, but the foundation. His hands were rough. His shirt had been washed so many times the gray had gone soft at the collar. And in his eyes, there was something she had not seen in a man in longer than she could remember. The complete absence of want. He did not want her money. He did not want her name. He did not want her gratitude, her number, her attention, or her story. He wanted nothing except for a woman's no to be respected, and that want was so ordinary, so fundamentally decent, that it stunned her. Because in her world, decency without motive had become the rarest currency. No, Vivienne said, and it took Grant a full second to realize she was not answering his question. She was answering every question he had ever asked her. He stays. The two words moved through the ballroom like a change in pressure. Waiters paused. Donors recalculated. Grant's jaw worked once, then reset. You will regret this, he said quietly, not to Marcus but to Vivienne. The words were dressed as prophecy, but they sounded like the last line of a negotiation he had already lost. He turned and walked toward the service corridor, pulling his phone from his breast pocket with the efficiency of a man who had already moved from humiliation to strategy. At the edge of the ballroom, standing near the main doors in a dark blue security blazer, a man named Earl Booker watched the entire scene with careful stillness. Booker was 61, head of security for the Sterling Meridian for 19 years. He was tall, silver at the temples, and black, the kind of black man who had survived corporate hospitality by learning exactly which silences to keep and which doors to guard without ever being asked to walk through them. He had trained 3 general managers, outlasted 2 ownership changes, and never once been invited to sit at a gala table, though he had stood beside more than 100 of them. He had seen Marcus step out. He had seen the hand on the woman's wrist. He had seen the room do nothing. And he had felt the old familiar ache of recognition. A black man standing alone in a white room, holding the truth like a flashlight in a building that preferred the dark. But Earl Booker was not the man he had been at 30. He had a pension. He had a grandson starting college in the fall. He had learned that the world does not reward the men who stand up, it rewards the men who stand down quietly enough to still be standing in the morning. He walked toward Marcus as the ballroom murmur resumed. Webb, back to your post. Now, Marcus looked at him. Mr. Booker, don't. Booker's jaw was set, but his eyes were not angry. They were afraid. Whatever you think you just did in there, it's already being turned into something else. These people don't lose, Marcus. They rewrite. And you just gave them a rough draft. I hear you, Marcus said, but I'm not going back in there to pretend I didn't see what I saw. Booker stared at him. Then, almost imperceptibly, his expression cracked, not into a smile, but into something older, sadder, closer to grief than approval. Then God help you, son, he said quietly, because this hotel won't. Vivienne found him near the east elevators. The hallway was quiet. The gala's noise softened to a low hum behind the ballroom doors. You should not have had to do that, she said. Marcus glanced at her. Probably not. But nobody else was going to. Do you know who he is? No, do you know who I am? No, ma'am. The honesty landed harder than any compliment Vivienne had received in years. This man had intervened without knowing the name of the woman he had defended or the weight of the man he had challenged. She opened her clutch and removed a checkbook. The gesture was automatic, muscle memory from years of converting uncomfortable moments into clean transactions. Let me thank you properly. Marcus looked at the checkbook. Not insulted, not tempted, just still. Please don't do that. You don't know the amount. The amount isn't the problem. Then what is? I didn't do it for a receipt. She closed the checkbook. As she did, something fell from Marcus's shirt pocket. A small, folded paper that landed face up on the carpet between them. The crayon drawing. The stick figures. My dad fixes everything. Marcus bent to pick it up, but Vivienne was already holding it, studying the crooked letters. Your daughter? Naya. She's 9. He took the paper gently from her fingers and folded it back into his pocket. She puts one in my lunch bag every morning. Different drawing, same message. It's not always true. But she believes it is, and some mornings that's the only engine I've got. Vivienne felt something shift behind her ribs, the ache of recognizing a kind of love she had only ever seen from the outside. What is Naya's project? Emergency design for old buildings. What happens when the power goes out? Backup lights, safe exits, how the air keeps moving. How did she choose that? Marcus was quiet for a moment. When he spoke, his voice had dropped to a register she had not heard before. Softer, rougher, pulled from a place he did not visit often. Her mother was sick. Denise, 3 years in and out of hospitals. One night the power went out in her room, just for a minute, maybe less, but Denise was on oxygen, and Naya was sitting beside the bed, and when the lights came back, Naya was holding her mother's hand so tight her knuckles were white. He paused. Denise died 4 months later. But Naya never forgot that minute of darkness. She said she wanted to make sure no one in a building ever feels like they can't find their way out. The hallway was silent. Vivienne looked at the elevator, then at Marcus, then at the folded drawing still visible at the edge of his pocket. When does her showcase start? 7 minutes. Then we should walk. He hesitated, because a lifetime of navigating spaces that tolerated him only in uniform had taught him that invitations from powerful people often came with doors that closed behind you. I mean it, Vivienne said. I would like to see what Naya built. Marcus studied her face. Then he nodded, and they walked toward the staircase that curved above the lobby like a quiet bridge between two worlds. Below, the gala hummed. Above, children's voices spilled from the showcase hall. And behind them, visible through the narrow gap in the ballroom doors, Grant Prescott stood watching with his phone pressed to his ear and his face stripped of every pretense except control. I need the maintenance worker's full file by morning, Grant said quietly. Employment history, custody records, anything with a crack in it. And get me a meeting with the hotel's general manager. Tell him it's about liability. He hung up and walked back into the ballroom with the smooth confidence of a man who had lost a battle and already decided to win the war by burning the field. Upstairs, Marcus did not know any of this. He only knew that Naya was waiting, that the lights in her model building were glowing, and that somewhere between the second floor and the rest of his life, the night had quietly changed direction. The showcase hall smelled like glue sticks, poster paint, and the particular electricity of children waiting to be seen. 15 tables lined the room. Trifled boards leaned against stacked chairs. A 6th grader's potato battery powered a small desk fan that clicked with each rotation. Somewhere near the window, a child was explaining photosynthesis to her grandmother with the seriousness of a surgeon. And there, At the second table from the back, Nia Webb stood beside her model building, touching the tiny emergency strips along its cardboard corridors as if reassuring them. She wore a yellow cardigan over a dress her father had ironed that morning, and her hair was pulled into two neat puffs held by barrettes shaped like ladybugs, the ones Denise had bought from a pharmacy clearance bin during a good week between treatments, when the world still pretended it had time. Nia's face searched the doorway. Her brave expression was losing altitude. Then she saw Marcus. Her whole body changed. Not a jump, not a scream, something deeper, more structural, like a building settling into its foundation after a tremor. "Daddy, you came." Marcus set his toolbox by the wall and crouched until his eyes were level with hers. "I told you I would. You're late." "I know." He touched her cheek with one rough finger. "But not gone. Never gone." The words carried more weight than Nia understood. She had heard them before, after Denise's funeral, after the apartment move, after the morning Marcus showed up to her school concert 17 minutes late with plaster dust on his shirt and tears on his cheeks that he blamed on allergies. Not gone. Never gone. It was their contract. The one thing left standing when everything else had fallen. Nia noticed Vivienne standing a few steps behind her father and straightened with the sudden formality of a child who has been taught that strangers deserve effort. "Are you here for the showcase?" "I am," Vivienne said. And meant it. Nia brightened. "My building keeps people safe when the power goes out. See, the main lights connect here." She pointed to a bundle of yellow thread inside the model. "But if they fail, the backup strips along the floor turn on automatically, so people can follow the glow to the exits." "She designed the routing herself," Marcus said quietly. "Daddy helped with the wiring," Nia whispered. "But the idea was mine." "The idea is always the important part," Marcus said. Nia bit her lower lip, the way she did when something mattered more than she knew how to hold. She looked at her model, then at Vivienne, then at a small index card taped to the front of the table. "I wrote a dedication," she said. "Do you want to hear it?" Marcus had not seen the card. He leaned forward slightly. Nia picked it up and read in a voice that trembled only at the edges, "This project is for people who get scared when the lights go out. For my mom, who was brave even in the dark, and for my dad, who always finds the way back." The showcase hall continued around them. The potato battery clicked. The tennis ball planets swung gently. A teacher clapped for a boy with a volcano. But at Nia's table, Marcus turned his face slightly to the side, just enough so that his daughter would not see the water that had gathered in his eyes, just enough so that the man who never cried in front of anyone could protect his one remaining lie. Vivienne saw it. She looked away, not out of politeness, but out of reverence, because she understood, in that moment, that she was watching a kind of strength she had never been taught to recognize. Not the strength of men who command rooms, but the strength of men who leave rooms rather than let their daughters see them break. Then Marcus's radio crackled. "Webb, report to the security office." Immediately, the word immediately had teeth. Nia's smile faded. She had heard that sound before, the interruption that takes her father away, the voice that owns him from 7 to 3. Marcus unclipped the radio. "Can it wait 10 minutes? A pause. Then the general manager's voice, tight and thin. "No." Now, Marcus looked at Nia. He looked at the glowing model. He looked at the stairwell leading back down into the world where men like Grant Prescott turned buildings into weapons and workers into targets. He kissed his daughter's hair. "Stay with your project, baby. I'll be right back." Nia held his sleeve. "Are you in trouble?" "No." The lie was the kind fathers tell when the truth is too heavy for a child's arms. Just paperwork. He stood, squeezed her hand once, and turned toward the stairs. Vivienne watched him go, and in his walk she saw something that unsettled her. A particular tiredness in his shoulders, the posture of a man who had been summoned like this before. Who knew what waited at the bottom of that staircase and went anyway because the only alternative was to stop showing up, and he had made a promise never to do that. She looked at Naya, who was adjusting the model's tiny exits with steady hands and wet eyes. Then, she followed Marcus down. The security office sat behind frosted glass on the ground floor, wedged between the concierge closet and the staff locker room. It was a small room with a large purpose, 6 monitors, 3 filing cabinets, and the particular hum of a space that recorded everything and explained nothing. The general manager, Arthur Hadley, waited inside with his jacket off and his tie loosened. The universal uniform of a man who has been pressured from above and is about to apply that pressure downward. Beside him stood a junior security officer who avoided Marcus's eyes the way people avoid mirrors when they do not like what they might see. And in the corner, arms folded, face composed into the careful architecture of concern, stood Grant Prescott. Marcus stopped at the door. He looked at Grant, then at Hadley. "Mr. Webb," Hadley began, clearing his throat twice before continuing. "We have received a formal complaint regarding your conduct this evening." "From who?" Hadley's eyes moved involuntarily toward Grant, then back. "That is not relevant at this stage. What is relevant is that you left your assigned post during a high-profile event, confronted a guest in the grand ballroom, and created a disturbance that several donors have described as threatening." Marcus absorbed this the way old buildings absorb weather, silently, structurally, without cracking. "I did not threaten anyone. Your behavior has been described as aggressive and insubordinate." "By whom?" Grant stepped forward, not all the way, just enough to establish his presence in the geometry of the room. "Marcus, may I call you Marcus?" He did not wait. "I understand you felt you were doing the right thing. Men in your position often mistake proximity for understanding. You saw something, interpreted it through your own lens, and reacted. That's human. But it's also liability." Marcus looked at him. "I saw a woman being held against her will. You saw a conversation between 2 people whose relationship and history you know nothing about." Grant's voice was warm, almost paternal, which made it worse. "Ms. Calloway and I have a long-standing professional partnership. What you interpreted as distress was simply a disagreement between colleagues. Now, before we continue, if this story's got you feeling something, we'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments. What would you have done in Marcus's place? Would you have risked your job? And if you haven't already, that like button and subscription make sure these stories keep reaching the people who need them. Let's keep going, because things are about to get much harder for Marcus." Marcus said nothing. He had learned, in years of working under men who owned the buildings where he replaced the wires, that silence was sometimes the only honest answer available to a man without power. Hadley placed a printed sheet on the desk. "Additionally, we've received information suggesting that your employment history may contain inconsistencies." Marcus's brow tightened. "Inconsistencies?" "Gaps. Unexplained periods. A previous employer who could not confirm your departure was voluntary." Hadley was reading from the page without looking up, which meant someone had handed him the words. "Given tonight's incident, we're obligated to conduct a full review of your personnel file. In the meantime, your access credentials have been suspended." Marcus felt the floor beneath him shift. Not literally, not dramatically, but in the slow, awful way foundations move when the soil has been poisoned from underneath. He knew what this was. He had seen it before, in other buildings, other cities, other versions of the same story. A powerful man embarrassed in public, reaching into the bureaucratic machinery to transform his humiliation into someone else's ruin. "My record is clean," Marcus said quietly. "I have never been fired. I have never been disciplined. Every gap on my resume corresponds to a hospital visit or a funeral." The words sat in the room like stones on a pond. Grant looked away, not from guilt, but from the inconvenience of detail. Hadley folded the paper. "Until the review is complete, you are relieved of duties. We'll need your badge and your master key." Marcus unclipped his badge slowly. He placed it on the desk beside the master key that had opened every door in this building. Doors to electrical rooms, doors to storage closets, doors to the quiet places where he worked while the world above him celebrated things he could not afford. "May I get my daughter?" he asked. Hadley nodded, unable to meet his eyes. Marcus turned toward the door. Grant's voice followed him. "For what it's worth," Grant said, and the phrase was so rehearsed it sounded printed. "I hope you land on your feet. Men who work hard usually do." Marcus paused. He did not turn around. He said, very quietly, "Men who work hard don't need your hope, Mr. Prescott. They need you to stop standing on their hands." He walked out. In the corridor, Vivienne was waiting. She had heard everything through the frosted glass, not every word, but enough. Enough to recognize the machinery. Enough to know that Grant had not simply tried to embarrass Marcus in the ballroom. He had moved downstairs into the architecture of the hotel's authority and begun constructing a case designed to erase a man whose only crime was decency. "He's trying to destroy you," she said. Marcus stopped. He looked at her with an expression that was neither surprised nor defeated. Just tired. Deeply, structurally tired. The tiredness of a man who had been carrying weight so long that he no longer remembered what his body felt like without it. "He's been destroying men like me his whole life," Marcus said. "I'm just the one who was visible tonight." "Marcus." Vivienne's voice was different now. Not the CEO voice, not the boardroom voice, but the voice of a woman who had just watched a father lose his badge and ask only for permission to reach his child. "I own this building." He looked at her. "Callaway Bryce Holdings. We acquired the Sterling Meridian 18 months ago. The general manager reports to my chief operating officer. The security team reports to my facilities director. Every door in this hotel answers to my company." Marcus processed this slowly. The woman he had defended without knowing her name owned the floors he mopped, the elevators he repaired, the hallways he walked at midnight when the building was empty and honest. "You, yes." She stepped closer. "And Grant Prescott does not get to use my building to punish a man who did what every other person in that ballroom was too comfortable to do." Marcus was quiet for a long time. Then, "I didn't know. I know you didn't." That's why it mattered. From the second floor, the sound of children clapping drifted down the stairwell, the muffled thunder of small hands celebrating someone's baking soda volcano, someone's potato clock, someone's cardboard building with lights that glowed when everything else went dark. Vivienne looked toward the staircase. And for the first time in years, she felt a memory she had buried so deep she had almost forgotten where to dig. She was 9 years old. Standing in the hallway of a county courthouse in Meridian, Mississippi, her father, James Calloway, was inside, in a room full of men who wanted to rezone his land, 40 acres of farmland that had been in the family since Reconstruction, for a highway bypass that would benefit a developer who had never set foot in the county. James Calloway was not a lawyer. He was not an investor. He was a man with soil under his fingernails and a voice that shook when he was angry. And he stood in that room holding a folder of property records and spoke for 11 minutes about what that land meant. what it had cost, and why he would not sell it to men who could not even say its name correctly. He lost. The rezoning passed. The highway went through. But Vivienne remembered standing in that hallway, watching her father walk out with his folder and his shaking hands and his dignity still intact. And understanding, at 9, the same age Naya was now, that some men lose everything and keep the only thing that matters. She had built an empire on that memory. She had promised herself she would never be the one standing in the hallway while someone else decided her future. And now, in this corridor, she realized she had been watching a man just like her father. A man who lost rooms but kept his word, who lost badges but kept his daughter, who lost everything the world uses to measure worth and somehow remained the most valuable person in the building. Her phone buzzed. A text from her chief legal officer, emergency board call. Conference Room B. Grant Prescott has filed a formal complaint alleging employee misconduct and executive instability. He is requesting temporary control authority over Callaway Bryce Holdings. Board assembling now. Vivienne read it twice. The second time, her hand was steady, but her jaw was not. "He's not just coming for you," she said to Marcus. "He's coming for everything." Marcus looked at her phone, then at the stairwell, then at the second floor where Naya's model still glowed. "Then we go up there," Vivienne said, "and we tell the truth. The truth doesn't always win in rooms like that." "No," Vivienne said, "but it's the only thing I'm willing to carry into one." Marcus picked up his toolbox, the one the hotel no longer wanted him to carry, and followed her toward the elevators. And somewhere behind them, inside the frosted glass of the security office, Earl Booker sat alone at the monitor wall, watching camera feeds he had been told to ignore, and feeling the weight of a decision he was not yet brave enough to make. His hand rested on a USB drive. On it were the original access logs, the ones that showed Marcus Webb had never opened the lower relay cabinet, the ones that showed a different keycard, registered to a name Booker recognized, had been used at 7:54 p.m. in a corridor that was supposed to be empty. Booker looked at the drive. He looked at the door. He thought about his pension, his grandson, the 19 years he had spent learning which silences kept a black man safe inside walls that would never truly belong to him. Then he thought about Marcus Webb crouching beside his daughter, saying not gone, never gone. And the drive burned in his hand like a promise he had not yet decided whether to keep. Conference Room B was a glass-walled room above the lobby with a long mahogany table, 8 leather chairs, and the particular hush of a space designed to make difficult decisions feel like architecture instead of violence. By the time Vivienne entered, the board members were already seated, 5 men and 2 women in loosened evening wear, each calculating risk behind careful expressions. Grant Prescott stood at the far end beside a projector screen, his composure rebuilt, his cufflinks catching the light like small silver verdicts. He paused when Marcus entered behind Vivienne, toolbox in one hand, the posture of a man who had never entered a boardroom in his life but understood the weight of every room he had ever stood in. "Vivienne," Grant's voice was silk wrapped around a wire. "I hope you are not presenting this as your defense." "I am presenting him as a witness," she said. She did not sit. Grant gestured toward the screen, where Marcus's employee photograph appeared beside a timeline of access alerts and incident reports, all stamped, all formatted, all carrying the institutional authority of paperwork that does not need to be true to be effective. At 7:48 this evening, Mr. Webb abandoned his assigned post. At 7:52, he confronted a guest in the grand ballroom. By 8:15, Miss Callaway had left the monitored event in the company of an unvetted employee, creating both a security exposure and an optics liability. Grant lowered his voice the way men do when they want cruelty to sound like compassion. I'm not asking for punishment. I'm asking for protection. Vivienne has been under extraordinary pressure. Tonight, she made choices that suggest she may benefit from a temporary step back, a cooling period, if you will, while calmer heads guide the company. A board member shifted. Another studied her pen. The room was not convinced, but it was listening, and in boardrooms, listening is halfway to agreeing. Vivienne felt the trap close, the same trap she had felt in ballrooms, in investor meetings, in every room where men rearranged the furniture of her authority and called it concern. Then the door opened. Earl Booker stood in the frame. His security blazer was buttoned. His jaw was set. In his right hand, he held a USB drive like a man holding a grenade he had already decided to throw. "Mr. Booker," Hadley said from the corner, "this is a closed meeting. Then close it after I'm done." Booker walked to the table and placed the drive beside the projector laptop. He did not look at Grant. He did not look at Hadley. He looked at Marcus. "I should have done this an hour ago," he said quietly. Then, louder, to the room, "The access logs presented by Mr. Prescott are incomplete. The original logs, which I preserved before they were altered, show that Mr. Webb's credentials were not used at the lower relay cabinet at any time this evening." Grant's expression held, but something behind it shifted. A crack in load-bearing stone. Booker opened the drive's contents on the laptop. 2 files. One was the original access log, time-stamped and unedited. The other was a camera recording from a corridor near the old service stairwell, the temporary unit installed for the renovation crew, the one most people had forgotten. The footage played. A man in a dark suit moved down the narrow corridor, used a keycard at the relay cabinet, and removed something small from inside. His face was turned away, but his posture, his build, and the platinum flash at his wrist were unmistakable. The room watched. Grant did not move. Booker paused the footage and turned to the board. The keycard used belongs to a guest access profile registered under the name of a Prescott Capital associate. The relay that was disconnected controls a secondary security feed, one that would have recorded the full sequence of events in the ballroom corridor. He folded his hands. "Mr. Webb didn't break anything tonight. Someone else broke it and tried to make it look like his hands did the damage. Silence. The kind that has weight." Marcus looked at Booker, this man who had told him to go back to his post, who had warned him that the hotel would not protect him, who had spent 19 years learning which silences kept him safe, and understood what it had cost him to walk through that door. Grant recovered with the practiced speed of a man who had spent a lifetime turning evidence into interpretation. "This proves nothing definitive. Any number of employees could match that, Mr. Prescott." It was Marcus. His voice was low, steady, and carried the strange authority of a man who had nothing left to lose and therefore nothing left to perform. "I fix lights. That's what I do. I find the broken circuits and I make them work again." He looked at Grant, and there was no anger in his face, only a tiredness so deep it had become a kind of clarity. "I didn't create the darkness tonight. You did." The words settled into the room like dust after a building stops shaking. Vivienne stepped forward. From her hands, she placed Naya's cardboard model on the mahogany table. The shoebox building with its tiny emergency strips, its silver tape roof, its careful exits marked in a child's handwriting. She had carried it from the showcase hall, and it sat now among the leather folders and crystal water glasses like a small, stubborn truth surrounded by expensive lies. "This model," Vivienne said, "was built by Mr. Webb's 9-year-old daughter. It maps the emergency systems of this hotel more accurately than our own facilities report." "The service corridor that Mr. Booker's footage comes from?" Nia Webb identified it on her project board as a blind spot in the building's safety design. She looked at the board. A child saw what our systems missed. A maintenance worker did what our donors wouldn't. And a man who donates to this hotel tried to use its own infrastructure to destroy the one employee who showed this company what integrity looks like. Grant opened his mouth, but the room had already moved. The board chair removed his glasses. "Mr. Prescott," he said, "your complaint is withdrawn. Your access to all Callaway Bryce properties is suspended pending a full investigation. Security will escort you out." Grant looked around the table for an ally. He found none. The silence that had once protected him, the polite, expensive silence of people who preferred comfort over conscience, had shifted. It was no longer his silence. It belonged to the room now, and the room had decided what it meant. He left without a word. The door closed behind him with the soft click of something finished. Marcus stood at the table, his toolbox at his feet, his hands finally still. Vivienne looked at him, and for the first time all night, her voice carried a tremor she did not try to hide. "Mr. Webb, I owe you an apology." He shook his head. "You don't owe me anything." "I do. I watched you step into that ballroom and I thought, for just a second, that you wanted something. Everyone wants something. That's the only language I've been taught." She paused. "You taught me a different one tonight." Marcus looked down at his hands. They were trembling, not from fear, not from adrenaline, but from the slow release of something he had been carrying so long his body had forgotten how to set it down. Years of holding everything together. The grief, the bills, the night shifts, the school mornings, the quiet apartment where Denise's absence filled every room like a sound no one else could hear. All of it, pressing outward through his fingers now that the danger had passed and his body finally had permission to be honest. Earl Booker cleared his throat. He stood near the door, one hand still on the frame. The posture of a man deciding whether he had earned the right to stay. "I spent 19 years in this building learning how to be invisible," Booker said. "Tonight a man with a tool belt reminded me that invisible isn't the same as safe." He looked at Marcus. "I should have walked out with you the first time." Marcus nodded. Not with forgiveness, that was too large a word for a hallway conversation. But with recognition, the recognition of two black men standing in a building that had made room for their labor but never for their full selves, and understanding that the distance between silence and complicity is shorter than either of them had wanted to believe. Vivienne turned to the board. "We're done for tonight." And then, quieter, to Marcus. "Let's go find your daughter." They found Nia asleep. She was curled in a plastic chair beside her project table, her yellow cardigan pulled over her shoulders like a blanket, one hand still resting on the edge of her cardboard building. The showcase hall was empty now. The potato battery had been unplugged. The tennis ball planets hung still. A blue ribbon was taped beside Nia's model, Best Real-World Application, written in her teacher's careful hand. Marcus crouched beside her. He did not wake her. He just watched her breathe, the way he had watched Denise breathe in those final weeks, counting each one like a man counting coins he knows are running out. But Nia's breathing was steady. Full, unafraid, he lifted her gently. She stirred, her face pressing into his shoulder, and murmured something he almost didn't catch. "Did you fix it, Daddy?" He closed his eyes. "Yeah, baby, we fixed it." "The whole building?" "The whole building." She fell back asleep against his neck, and Marcus carried her down the staircase, past the lobby where the gala's remains were being swept into black bags, past the frosted glass of the security office where his badge still sat on the desk beside a master key that no longer mattered. Vivienne walked beside him. She did not speak. She did not need to. Some silences are not empty. They are full of things too important to shrink into words. At the employee entrance, the cold night air came in off the Potomac, and the city lights trembled on wet pavement like a question no one had asked yet. Weeks later, Marcus was offered a position as Director of Safety Infrastructure for Callaway Bryce Holdings. He accepted, but only after Vivienne agreed to flexible hours for school pickups, science fairs, and the pancake mornings Naya refused to negotiate on. His office was on the 4th floor of the Sterling Meridian, 2 floors above the ballroom, with a window that overlooked the city he had once helped build from underneath. Earl Booker retired that spring. At his farewell dinner, small, quiet, held in the staff break room with grocery store cake and paper plates, he shook Marcus's hand and said only, "Next time, I won't need a reminder." Marcus said, "Next time, you won't." And Vivienne stopped feeling chased. For the first time in years, she did not measure the men around her by what they wanted from her. She measured them by what they were willing to protect without being asked. It was not romance, not yet. It was something older and more necessary. The slow, careful recognition between two people who had learned to carry weight alone and were beginning to wonder what it might feel like to set some of it down beside someone who would not pick it up and run. 9 years later, Naya Webb stood at a podium in a cap and gown, delivering the student address at Howard University's College of Engineering. She spoke about buildings, about the ones that keep people safe and the ones that don't, about emergency systems and backup lights and the quiet, invisible labor of the people who make sure that when the power fails, the path still glows. She did not mention her father by name until the last 30 seconds. "My dad taught me that buildings are like people," she said. "When the main lights fail, the safe path still has to glow." She paused. The auditorium was still. "He spent years working nights so I could have mornings. He gave up boardrooms so he could make it to my science fairs. People called that falling behind. He called it keeping a promise." She looked into the 3rd row, where Marcus sat in a pressed shirt and a tie Vivienne had picked out for him that morning. His hands were folded in his lap, the same rough, lined hands that had carried her from showcase halls and mended cardboard buildings and held her mother's fingers until there was nothing left to hold. "You were never small, Dad," Naya said. "You were the biggest thing in every room." The world just wasn't looking down far enough to see it. Marcus Webb, who had cried exactly once in a parking garage 14 years ago, cried again. This time, he did not turn his face. This time, his daughter was watching, and he wanted her to see that strong men are not men who never break. They are men who break honestly, in front of the people they love, and trust those people to still be there when the lights come back on. Vivienne reached over and took his hand, not to hold him together, just to remind him that he didn't have to hold himself together alone anymore. And somewhere in the back of the auditorium, a 9-year-old girl in a yellow cardigan, one of Naya's mentees from the after-school engineering program, leaned over to her father and whispered, "Daddy, I want to build things like that." Her father squeezed her hand. "Then we will," he said. This story was about a man the world measured by his uniform, and a daughter who measured him by his heart. If it stayed with you, tell us in the comments what moment hit you the hardest. Was it Marcus stepping through that curtain? Or Naya's dedication? Or those words, "You were never small, Dad"? We want to hear it. And if you believe that quiet kindness, real sacrifice, and a father's love still have the power to change a room, share this video with someone who needs to hear it today. Subscribe to Dad Untold Chronicles so you never miss a story. Thank you for watching until the very end. It means more than you know.